Coming up on Outlook, you know, it's not uncommon for us to take for granted the wonderful natural resources and rich history in our area. Well, such is the case with internationally renowned areas all around us. We're going to talk about that, and you better get those kilts ready. It's time for the Glasgow Highland Games. Outlook is next. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're so glad you joined us. You know, it's through no fault of our own, but sometimes we take for granted all the wonderful historical significance around us and the natural resources. Well, such is the case with something called Mammoth Cave National Park. It's getting ready to celebrate 100 years as part of the National Park Service, 200 years of giving tours, and before I go any further, let's just bring in the experts. What do you say? We're welcoming to the program the Superintendent of Mammoth Cave National Park, Sarah Craighead. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
In addition, the PIO, which stands for the Public Information Officer, Vicki Carson. Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
So when we talk about Mammoth Cave National Park being a part of a larger entity, that's known as the National Park Service. Help our audience understand what that means.
Certainly. National parks are places in this country that have national significance, either from the resources, the natural resources, the biology that's there, or cultural resources that may be historic homes of presidents or things of that nature. So there are 408 units of the National Park Service, and Mammoth Cave is one of those units.
Well, and when you talk about in the state of Kentucky, you mentioned presidential homes and of course Abraham Lincoln's birthplace, and there's the Cumberland Gap National Historic Park, and then Mammoth Cave. And as its name implies, it is mammoth. Tell our audience who might not know something really significant about Mammoth Cave that might be something interesting to know.
Well, one thing I think is interesting is that within Mammoth Cave National Park there are 400 caves, and Mammoth Cave is just one of those. And of course it's 400 miles long, or so far it is, and the longest known cave system in the whole world.
And when you bring up caves, so what people may not realize, there are 400, as you say, but we're also celebrating 200 years of cave tours. Now put that in perspective, right? Go back 200 years and imagine that the technology was not such as it is now. And that's kind of an eye-opener, isn't it?
It is. It's hard to imagine people using lanterns to try to make their way through large passages and over rocks and in incredibly difficult terrain. And plus the women were often wearing dresses or bloomers or things that would not have been very comfortable. So it was quite a trip for them 200 years ago.
So how is it that we will celebrate then these milestones in the National Park Service and of course with Mammoth Cave National Park? Do you have plans for that?
Yes, and a few this year and then more in 2016, because that's when the real anniversary is. And we have several things, activities or milestones. One thing that is coming up, we're giving it a trial run this year. We're doing longest day of play on the first day of summer, the longest day of the year. And we're going to do a mammothon.
I like that, a mammothon, and you heard it here. Longest day of play.
Yes.
So in other words, come on out, you're inviting the public to come on and play all day.
Right, at dawn and after dark. And then in between, we're having this activity where we're inviting, it's not a race, but to walk 2 miles inside the cave, walk 2 miles of trails on the surface, and then to bicycle on the Mammoth Cave Railroad hike and bike trail out to Park City and back. And if they do all of that, it's 24 miles, so it's almost a marathon, but it's not. It's a mammothon.
They've coined a new word. Yes. Now, for someone who's never been to Mammoth Cave National Park before, first of all, it is a wonder, and it is a place of beauty. Now, I'm hearing someone out there saying, oh, I don't like caves, I don't want to go in the cave. You don't have to go in the cave, do you?
No. Oh my goodness, no. The park was set aside for the caves, but also for the river valleys of Green and Nolin, and then the hilly country, which is typical of this part of Kentucky. And my goodness, it's 53,000 acres. It's all hardwood forest. really dense, lots of wildlife. You always see turkeys. In fact, they're out strutting today as we were driving down here, and deer. And oftentimes you hear woodpeckers in the woods. But there are 85 miles of trails, and all of those are for hiking. About 60 of them are designated for horseback riding, and about 20 of them are designated for bicycle riding. And each of those is really growing in popularity. And then the river, oh my goodness, we've had, I think it was 16,000 people that traveled the river last year, and about 4,000 of them were during the month of July. And we have several liveries that service, you know, where you can rent a canoe and they put you in one place and then pick you up in another, so you don't have that
transport issue.
That transport issue, yes.
Which can be troublesome, yes.
But there's just so much to do in the park, and camping and picnicking. And just yesterday I was talking to somebody and they said, you know, after work, we just come out and drive through the park.
And just look and see.
Yeah.
Well, like so many other entities, funding is always an issue. Is that something that is of concern to you as superintendent of Mammoth Cave National Park?
Well, we always want to be careful with the money. This is, of course, money that belongs to the American people, and so we try to be very fiscally conservative and careful with how our spending is done. And we have partners that help us with a variety of our needs. One of the most important of those partners is the Friends of Mammoth Cave National Park. And they're a great organization that helps us, particularly as we serve youth in the communities, whether that be through the Junior Ranger programs or through getting kids from schools into parks on field trips. Not every school has the money to be able to do that. And so our Friends organization is very useful in helping us do those things. But we also have a variety of groups that help us with things like maintaining trails, including bicycle organizations, the Southern Kentucky International Mountain Biking Association here, and that's centered out of Bowling Green helps with that. The Mammoth Cave Backcountry Horsemen helps maintain trails, and so we have a variety of stewardship actions that help us meet our needs.
And then you also have such an amazing draw that you bring in people from all over the world. I think our audience might be a little shocked at how many people come from this globe.
Well, every day when you're in the visitor center, you'll hear another language being spoken. And I don't know that we have a huge population that comes from other countries. It's probably around 5%, but it's constant. And we are a World Heritage Site. That's a UNESCO designation. And many international travelers seek out World Heritage Sites. Okay. And we're one of those, being an internationally significant site of natural and cultural heritage.
We've got some footage of the park thanks to our senior producer Cheryl Beckley and Karen, our director. If you would roll some of that. It's, as we say, it's a beautiful place. You don't have to go inside the cave, but I mean just the natural resources, the wildflowers.
Oh yes, yeah. In the spring it's a wonderful time to see wildflowers, but actually August is our highest, it's our peak wildflower season. But August isn't always a nice time to be out in the park. It's a little hot and steamy, and a lot of people don't get out to enjoy it, but oh my goodness, there's just wildflowers everywhere then. Lots of prairie plants too.
And as you say, you don't have to go into a cave. You can actually walk the trails. You can do horseback riding. That's the most important thing. But we talked about the dollars and cents, you know, being good stewards of the taxpayers' money.
Right.
But also, we don't realize by bringing in these tourists from all over the world, you know, it's an economic boon to the state.
That's exactly right. The money that's spent at Mammoth Cave National Park and the people that come in to enjoy the park spend their money also in the communities. And we generate in the neighborhood of about $43 million in economic benefit in spending, visitor spending in these local communities. And we have in the neighborhood of 300 jobs that are generated from that spending. So it's a very important economic driver for the area.
Yes, because of course if they're coming to Mammoth Cave, you hope that they are going to maybe explore and
That's
see
right.
some of the surrounding areas and that kind of thing.
That's right.
Now, as far as the future, okay, we've got a set entity, a set quantity per se as it stands. So how do we look for the future? Is it just sustainability?
Yes. It's important for us to, as Sarah said, to be responsible fiscal managers, and to use the money that Congress allots us to the best of our ability, and then through partners be able to expand that as well. But I think one of the best examples of that is the partnership that we have with the horsemen and the bicycle riders, where we've told them we're so happy that they're there using the park, but they do cause wear and tear on the trails, and we don't have the means to keep the trails up to in good shape. So we've told them to please help us, and they've agreed to help us. And in some cases, if the trails fall into disrepair, some trails will close that they're responsible for. And that's a big responsibility for the public to take on, but they're willing because they want to use those trails and they love those trails.
You know, with all those people coming, how many visitors did you have last year? Do we have a
It was
sense?
over 500,000 that came to the park, and over 400,000 of those went in the cave. So most of our visitors go inside the cave, but the surface visitors are growing all the time.
How on earth do you keep track of that? I mean, think about that, the liability issue. How does that play into all of this?
Well, we have rangers that go with all of the visitors that are going on guided tours through the cave. So we are able to manage the groups that go through the cave. That helps a lot with safety issues, making sure that people are in the right locations and that they're traveling safely through the cave. But of course, a national park is inherently a wild area, and people must assume some risk when they come to those areas, whether it's just watching where they're walking and making sure that there are no snakes in an area, or just being responsible for themselves as they travel through these locations, because there's wildlife and other issues that can hurt you if you're not careful.
That's why we call it nature.
That's right.
Yeah, we don't cut the poison ivy. We don't bring the snakes in, you know.
We're having company bringing the snakes.
The ticks are out there, so
Right.
it is a wild place, like Sarah said, and so they're just our inherent risks that people have to take responsibility
Assume responsibility, sure. And the rich history that surrounds Mammoth Cave National Park, you know, give us just a glimpse of what people might learn when they visit there.
Well, one of the centennial projects we have is working with WKYU TV to do a program called Mammoth Cave, A Place Called Home, and that'll be coming out in 2016. And that's looking at the families that once lived on the park land. Mammoth Cave, Great Smoky Mountains, and Shenandoah were all created in the same way. Congress said, we'll make a national park there. It's a significant place, but the states are going to have to give the property to Congress. And so that's what happened here, Great Smokies, and in Shenandoah, where the people who lived on the land were bought out, some in a friendly manner, some not in a friendly manner. And so there's a culture that's lost, really. Neighborhoods, a way of living, a way of making a living, a way of, well, even integration between the black guides that worked at Mammoth Cave and lived on the property, and the white guides that worked at Mammoth Cave and lived on the property. And Gerald Beckley's working on capturing that, and I really look forward to that program to see what all comes of that, how it comes together. But
before it's lost, before this beautiful oral history is lost.
Yeah, she interviewed 10 different people, some couples that had a heritage or had memories of living in the park, and just wonderful things. You know, people who worked at the hotel and they had to walk 7 miles to work every day. Or people who worked at the Civilian Conservation Corps camps that were on the park when the park was being made. Someone else who had a motor lodge near on the road to Cave City, but it's within the park, and what that was like. And he said he was actually happy when the Park Service came and took things away because he got to move to town.
Oh, that was a big deal.
Yes.
Speaking of moving to town, of the nearly 500,000 visitors that you have on an annual basis, are we able to determine how many of them are local?
We have a pretty high percentage of local visitation. and it depends how you define local, but
Right.
from this area, probably 40% or so are from the area, and a larger percentage from the surrounding states. So it's a fairly high percentage of
I'm grinning
local
because
folks.
I'm sure when you're out and about and you meet someone who's never been to the park before, do you have that moment where you just want to say, get on down, see it, huh?
We invite everyone to come visit Mammoth Cave National Park. It's a wonderful resource. There's no charge for seeing the surface resources. People can come and drive around and use the picnic areas and just enjoy the park.
And as we prepare to celebrate the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, what would you want to leave our viewers with?
Oh my goodness.
I know, be
a thoughty
profound.
thought. Mammoth Cave is set aside as a national park, and it belongs to all the American people. It's history, it's prehistory, the geology, the botany, the zoology, the river sciences. It's a fascinating place. And it's a national park, so there are 58 national parks. Of all the 400 national park units, only 50 are national parks. So it's on the same level as Acadia or Everglades or Yosemite or Yellowstone or Grand Canyon. It's nationally and internationally significant. And it's right here.
And it's in your own backyard. Thanks to both of you. Now you've been challenged. Thanks to both of you for sharing the story of Mammoth Cave National Park. Get out there and see it. Vicki Carson, Sarah Craighead, thank you so much. And when we come back, you have kilts? No. Better get those kilts out. It's time for the Glasgow Highland Games. We're going to tell you about that when Outlook continues right after this. Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. Well, in the first segment, we learned about some things that maybe we take for granted, like Mammoth Cave National Park. Well, that's something that brings in international visitors, from all over the globe. Well, there's another something. It's a festival that's held in Glasgow, Kentucky every year. It's called the Glasgow Highland Games, and it too brings people from all over the globe. To tell us more about the upcoming festival, we are joined by Bobby Lee Hurt, who is the Vice President of the Glasgow Highland Games. Thanks for being here, Bobby.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is something that was begun back in the mid to late 80s, 1986. And why? What was the genesis of the Glasgow Highland Games?
We were a sister city, Glasgow, Kentucky to Glasgow, Scotland, and so some of our local folks got together and said, we need to have something relating to Scotland, our sister city. And so they all got together and studied about it for a couple of years and went to a few Highland Games around the country and decided to give it a whirl. And so here we are, 30 years later, we're still the Glasgow Highland Games. So
still wearing the kilts,
still wearing the kilts, eh?
No, now when you say you traveled the country to other Glasgow Highland Games, that means that these kinds of games are held domestically.
Yes, we're the largest games in the southeastern United States, but there's games in Atlanta, Georgia, in South Carolina, and California, different games all over the country. Okay.
So to put on a festival of this magnitude, now after 30 years, you've gotten kind of good at it, right?
Well,
but it's still a challenge.
It's kind of like wearing an old hat. You do the same thing, year after year, and it becomes much easier. It's still a lot of work for a lot of great volunteers, thank goodness. So.
And is it all pretty much volunteers who help
everything
take care of everything?
Everything is volunteer. We have hundreds of them over the past years that have helped and still have as well. So.
Now, as we speak, and we'll put up a website at the end of the show if you want to get more information, but it's coming up May 29th through the 31st. And so it's a weekend event. How many people do you get attending this event?
Normally 8,000 to 10,000 people. A lot of it depends on the weather, and it's a 3-day event, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful event. All kinds of activities doesn't matter what age you are. You'll find something that you do like. Okay.
Well, I'm grinning because you chances are you have a clan, okay? Now let me explain briefly what that means. So that means that you have some type of connection and or origin that you could trace to Scotland, and then once you did that, you could find out what clan your people came from.
Sure, you can actually do that on the field. My clan is McLean, which my grandmother was a McLean. So you can actually go back and trace your ancestors, and doesn't matter if your name is Jones or Smith, you'll find a clan that would fit your need. Okay.
And if not, you say there's a generic, the Glasgow clan.
You can always
wear
go
that?
with the Glasgow, Kentucky
Clan.
We have a clan, a tartan as well.
So yes, so there's usually an accompanying tartan. That's the difference in the plaids. It refers to what clan. So you could just eyeball it and say, oh, that's Clan McLean.
Correct.
Because of that tartan.
Yeah.
So if one has never been to the Glasgow Highland Games, as I have, there are some unusual athletic events that take place during the games.
Yeah.
And one in particular is the caber toss.
Yes, that's actually, it's a 125-pound caper, as we call it, and a lot of people call it telephone pole.
Looks like a telephone pole
yeah,
to me. Yes.
Yeah. and these huge guys come in
their kilts.
In their kilts and do the competition. And of course, the perfect throw is to turn it end over end at a perfect 12 o'clock. So that's the way they score their points. And a lot of these athletics, it's just like a NASCAR race. They get so many points for each game. If they win here, they go to the next game, and then at the end of the season, they get their reward. So that's the way they base it on. So
That's beautiful. And there's also, of course, music. If someone is into this type of Celtic music, it is plenty this weekend.
Lots of Celtic music. You'll hear bagpipes and all kinds of Scottish songs, and all weekend. It's all truly a Scottish event. And if you've never been there, when you leave, you'll say, "I'm glad I went." And we'd love to have more people and more. There's plenty of room. We got groups like Father, Son, and Friends have been coming for quite some time. Seven Nation, who is
very popular.
Very popular. I mean, they're all over the United States and Scotland as well. And Colin Grant Adams, who is a local musician from Glasgow, Kentucky, originally from Glasgow, Scotland. So. You get to get a lot, and we have a local group from Bowling Green, Feckless Fear Dugard. I'm sorry.
That's a mouthful. Say it again.
Feckless Fear Dugard, okay, from Bowling Green. So
Okay.
that's a local Scottish group that is playing at the games as well.
And they'll be dancing. There'll be Scottish dancing as well. Where is this event, the Glasgow Highland Games? Where do you hold it in Glasgow, Kentucky?
It's going to be at Barren River State Resort Park, which is located 10 miles outside of Glasgow on 31E. And we have a games field there, as we call it. And there's several pavilions. When you first pull into the park entrance, you can't miss it. There'll be tents everywhere. We'll have probably 65 to 70 clans that will be represented there, and it looks like you pull into a huge circus. There will be so many tents.
I love this. And we talked earlier with the Mammoth Cave National Park representatives about the economic boom that having a national park in our region brings to the state of Kentucky. Festivals like these also are an economic boom, aren't they?
Yes, ma'am. They bring hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, in the community. They fill up all the hotels in the surrounding area as well as the state park. And but it's just a tremendous amount of money that is spent. And these people not only come from all over the United States, they come from Scotland and Canada. And several people have moved here because of the Highland Games. They come to the games and they say, "Oh, we like this area," so they'll move here. And so that's happened, and it's been a big boost for the local community for a long, long time.
A long, long time. So once you get into the Glasgow Highland Games, May 29th through the 31st, those organizers, you and the others that you work with, I suspect you're already planning next year's celebration.
Yes, we start immediately after the games is over and start talking about what we're going to do next year. And of course, we always have a chief, a Highland Games chief. And
now, explain about that. Is he the chieftain or just the chief?
He's the chieftain,
Okay.
And but he is from Glasgow, Scotland. Hope Anderson, Chief Hope Anderson. So and each year we have a different chief from a different clan.
Is that like the Grand Marshal of the event?
Yes,
so to speak?
yeah. He is the guy that opens the games, and then he closes the games. And every event he is at that event. So like the tartan ball, that's a nice event. Then we have we got events all weekend. Like we start out actually on Friday with the Chief's lunching, so that's his first appearance. And then that night, Friday night, we have the Ceilidh, which is Scottish music, folk music, And if you've never been to them, you need to come and experience it.
And explore. And like I say, we're going to put up a website. It's the GlasgowHighlandGames.com, where you can find out more about the specific events. But leave us with some words of wisdom as Vice President of the Glasgow Highland Games here in Glasgow, Kentucky. I think you've tickled the interest of our viewers, those who've never been there before, to maybe come by. But what's something that they will walk away with that maybe they didn't think they would walk away with?
I think they'll come and they say, well, I didn't realize that the Scottish Games were like this. They'll walk away and say, I can't wait to come next year. They're just games for children. Like the children, we have make-believe castles made out of bales of hay, and the children have a war with water balloons in the castle. Just simple little things like that make your family feel good. And then you watching the caper toss, the amateur athletics.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
The mass bands. It's just a wonderful, wonderful event and
cultural experience.
It really is.
And a learning experience as well. Well, good luck. Hope everything goes as it should. And thank you for sharing the story.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. We've been talking with Bobby Lee Hurt, who is the Vice President of the Glasgow Highland Games. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're so glad you joined us.